Welcome to Peachtree Injury Talk with Attorney Jordan Jewkes.
Hello and welcome to the Peachtree Injury Talk with Attorney Jordan Jewkes. I'm your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are diving into the essentials you need to know about personal injury law in Georgia. Jordan, great to see you again.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me back.
All right, so we're going to talk about trucking accident cases in Georgia. Aside from just practicing personal injury law, we talked about that last episode. Specifically, what interests you about taking on serious and sometimes catastrophic trucking accident cases?
Yeah, right. I mean, if you've driven on the freeways in Georgia, you see just a ton of these big tractor trailers, 18-wheelers, diesels, whatever you want to call them. They fill the roadway. And fortunately, 99% of the truckers out there are great drivers, very attentive. But there are some out there who cut corners, who don't follow the regulations, and can really cause significant harm. So again, one of the reasons that we pursue these cases is to try and make the roadways safer. But when someone gets injured by a truck, very often it's a very significant injury, and they just have to hold them accountable to make the roadways safer.
It seems like there might be a growing number of trucking accident cases happening on Georgia roadways. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure because Atlanta is a great city and it's growing and people love to move here. And Atlanta has always been known as sort of a terminal, or, the old name of it is terminus. And so it's just a hub. That's probably not going to change anything. And one of the interesting things that not many people know about, the trucking laws in Georgia and the roadways themselves is that trucks aren't supposed to drive through the connector. So we have the 285 perimeter around Atlanta, and trucks that are just passing through are supposed to stay on that perimeter roadway, 285. And so the perimeter itself is just stuffed with trucks. And if you've driven on there, it's hard to miss them. But if you actually take the connector through Atlanta, 85, 75, you'll see that there's not as many trucks through there. And that's because they're supposed to stay on the outside of the city.
Oh, okay. So what's the number one cause of trucking accidents?
Gosh, I mean, there's a lot of statistics on that, and it tends to be truckers just trying to get there in a hurry, and very often it happens that they don't get the sleep that they are required to get. And so it's a combination of trying to cut corners, trying to get there faster, not having sleep, being sleep deprived is a major one. And the trucking industry is very heavily regulated. There's a lot of safety precautions because you have these big trucks going, 50 to 100 miles an hour. And sometimes they can't brake as fast, or sometimes they can't turn in the same ways that small cars can. And so they just are required to have a commercial driver's license, which requires a lot more training. And sometimes people just ignore the training for sake of getting somewhere a little bit faster, and it ends up causing serious harm.
Yeah, maybe a little cockiness too. Like you get so comfortable doing what you're doing, you're just like, I'll be fine. And you speed up a little bit, and then all of a sudden, you can't brake fast enough when something happens in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not something that's limited to truckers. I mean, attorneys are like that as well. We've got to be very attentive in what we do. And if we don't, we can cause injury as well. So yeah, You're 100% right.
Yeah, totally. Podcasters too.
Exactly.
What I could do to injure someone, but I suppose I could figure it out. What makes trucking accident cases different from other passenger vehicle accidents?
Right. I mean, that's a great question, because a lot of people that get hit by a truck probably can't, if they were to say, well, what's the difference? That's really takes someone with a level of expertise to know. But first of all, trucks are governed by, these big 18-wheelers, tractor trailers, as we call them, these big diesel engine vehicles. If they're over 10,000 pounds, then they are, which is virtually all of them, they're going to be governed under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act. And that act are federal regulations that sets forth the rules of how truck drivers have to operate these vehicles. And so that's one of the major things. And so there's all types of weight specifications, logbooks, type of sleep, certain medications that they have to go. It's almost like pilots flying an airplane, to use that analogy. And so there's a reason, Kevin, that you and I just can't walk into Walmart or Amazon and say, hey, I want to drive one of your trucks today, and they won't throw us the keys, because you have to have licenses, you have to have certain training. And so understanding why the truck or the truck driver caused the wreck requires a level of knowledge of those laws. And sometimes we have to bring in experts to be able to show why those laws were violated. And so trucking law is much different and much more complex than just regular private residence vehicles.
What kind of experts are typically brought in?
Yeah, I mean, there are accident reconstructionists, there are engineers, there are trucking experts, literally trucking experts. And a lot of those are just awesome guys that, spent their career driving big rigs and now go in and talk about what these regulations are and how they dealt with them as an expert or how they dealt with them as their driver. But highway safety experts, there's all types of experts, and knowing which one to use for that particular situation can make a difference between a good case and a bad case.
We talk a lot about it when it comes to personal injury, that people sometimes like to handle it on their own, not hire an attorney. It seems like almost if it's a trucking incident, then that's an even worse idea, is because you have way less knowledge about what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole nother ballgame. Like I said, it's akin to a pilot of an airplane, and so knowing what the insurance companies like to do with just a regular case, they're even more likely to push against the the injured party. It's really, really difficult to successfully pursue, at least for fair value, a claim against a truck driver company if you don't have representation. Certainly possible if you really wanted to try, but I don't know many people that have really attempted that with any level of success.
Yeah, it's got to be a lot more nuanced. Like there's just, like you said, just all these trucking. If you have a trucking expert, then obviously it's its own kind of ball game a little bit.
Yeah, and one of the very basic reasons for that is trucks keep this electronic data, kind of like black box in airplanes. Very similar, actually. One of the first things you should do if there's been a significant trucking wreck is notify the trucking company to preserve that black box data, because that's going to tell you everything: the speed that the truck was going, when it braked, all sorts of data that experts look at and break down, and that often will tell the story of what happened in the wreck. And very often the truck driver is going to say, well, it wasn't my fault. So-and-so, Kevin pulled in front of me and I couldn't avoid him. And there's been a lot of claims that were lost on that exact type of situation. Well, when you get that black box data, the trucking company knows they've got a problem. And just most people off the streets, most people aren't going to have any awareness of that or how to request it. And it costs money to get it. It's not free. You've got to hire an expert to go download it. And so it's a whole nother level of complexity.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So walk me through what happens in a typical trucking accident case in Georgia.
There's certainly some patterns to it, but they're all different. The very first thing, again, if you were in any type of wreck, the most important thing you've got to do is call the police and get the medical treatment you need. I mean, that goes without saying. And obviously taking pictures and, again, starting the documentation process. That's all we do is really document and try and figure out what happened and why it happened. But as far as that's a little bit different on the trucking cases, you always want to send someone to the site, and you always want to hire an expert that can go and can download the black box data and attempt to try and recreate what was happening prior to the wreck to show culpability or responsibility on behalf of the trucking company. Because almost always they're going to deny it, and they're going to look for a way to blame the person who was injured or some other driver on the road. And so the first thing you really want to do is try and recreate what happened at the scene. And the sooner you do that, the better chance you're going to have to accurately recapture it. And you may wonder, well, how do you not accurately do it? Well, that black box data can be erased, and often is erased, if they continue to use that truck. And there's all different types of trucks, and Volvos and diesels and Mack trucks. And so they all have different Peterbilt. They all have different types of mechanisms to record that data. And so you have to send the right person there to sort of quickly capture that data, so that you can determine what it says and then use it in your favor later on. And so once you sort of realize that, you also want to eventually get the driving record of the truck driver, and find out what his training was, what the safety protocols were, and you start to build a case, again, from the very beginning, from the morning of that wreck, or sometimes even earlier, as to what happened, what ultimately led to that. Because very often it's not just, hey, I blew through a stop sign. It's, I didn't get the proper sleep. I was on medication I shouldn't have been. I was going too fast. I had a deadline to meet. I was getting paid per hour and I wanted to meet a certain amount. There are just so many different things that along that process. But ultimately, we don't want to ever wrap up a case until our client is better and has completed their treatment, or at least knows when their treatment is going to be done, or whether or not they have a significant injury or not. But ultimately, we do negotiate with the trucking company or their insurance company on the claim to try and maximize the settlement for the injured party.
How common is it for insurance companies to lowball or deny settlements to your clients? And what do you do as the attorney if that happens?
Yeah, I mean, common. I mean, it's a regular occurrence. I mean, honestly, the insurance company wouldn't be a good insurance company if that's what they didn't try and do. I mean, that is the name of their game, is to try and lowball it. And they know which attorneys are gonna push a case and properly work it up. One of the really important aspects of any case that we take in here at the Jewkes firm is going to prepare the case as if we're going to go to trial. Now, 95% of the cases out there never go to trial. And we may have to file suit on some of those, but we don't. Rarely do they actually go to trial. But the insurance company knows that, and they know which attorneys just take a case to settle it versus those who know that they're actually going to take it to court if necessary and try the case in front of a jury.
So they know which one of you guys are going to push all the way and which ones are quick to just take the cash.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Kevin. And so you what you really want to do is posture the case as if you're going to go to trial. And if you do go to trial, you're ready. And if not, you get a really good settlement for it. So again, it's just doing every case, what needs to be done on every case every time.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you and your clients face during the process of semi-truck or commercial vehicle accident case?
The insurance companies are always well-funded, much more well-funded than they are on just a regular, neighborhood car wreck.
Sure.
And so they tend to hire really top-of-the-line experts. They hire top-of-the-line doctors to tell you that your MRI doesn't actually show an injury, or that broken bone on the X-ray really wasn't broken in the wreck. Believe it or not, they'll say things like that. And then, of course, and then they hire really good defense attorneys that get paid a lot of money to say that you weren't injured, or the truck driving experts are wrong, and that the drivers didn't do anything wrong. And so the defense is much higher, much greater, and frankly, a lot more costly. And so trucking accidents, those types of wrecks, you tend to have to be well-funded, have good resources, and to be able to manage and allocate those resources accordingly to make sure that you maximize the claim. It's not a cheap endeavor. It's not something that happens on a budget. You have to be willing to spend both time and money to get where it needs to go. Hearing
you talk, I'm starting to see why you decided to go the personal injury route instead of representing the insurance companies. I mean, I think I'd be the same way as you. It sounds kind of like, I don't know, it just sounds kind of shady, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's tough. The insurance companies are one of the crazy things I'll never understand about the insurance companies is that they would 9 times out of 10 they would rather pay the money to their own attorneys to not pay you that same money.
Right.
And that's why I say in a perfect world, the insurance company would sort of take an objective look at it and say, all right, we realize we're at fault. We realize we've caused you injury. Here's the amount of money we're willing to pay, and it's a fair amount of money. But that just never happens. And so never. And so you have these attorneys that have tried to help people, and that's where the industry comes from.
If a victim ends up dying as the result of a trucking accident, and maybe let's say that the case had already been started, the personal injury case had already been started, does it continue if the person dies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I know a lot of the fatalities on Georgia roads actually come from trucking wrecks. Certainly not all of them, but a good number of them do. And so you just have the weight and size of these trucks hitting someone at a high speed, and it's gonna cause a very significant impact that sometimes lead to death. But yeah, so the heirs of that person can always pursue the claim. And we've got, multiple cases where the individual who was struck, we'll call him the victim, either died at the scene or died a year later from complications, or maybe just died from something unrelated. But whoever that person's heir is, and if you're married, it's very often your married spouse or partner. But if you're not married, then it's usually your children. And if it's no children, then it would be your parents. And that's just a very brief look at that. Or whoever you've designated to be your heir in your will is probably the easiest answer. But yeah, they take over the claim from whenever the deceased or the victim is departs, unfortunately.
Yeah, God, that's tough. You lose a loved one, then you have to go through that. At the same time, you want to see justice and you want to see accountability and all that. So I think it'd be hard to, as a spouse or a son or a father or whatever, to not continue and try to at least hold people accountable.
Yeah. And believe it or not, Kevin, like I think there's a misconception out there that people who get in wrecks are all about the money. And
Sure.
Especially in our practice around where our offices are located, that's not the case. I mean, 99 out of 100 of them will say the money, yes, we need to be made whole, but we're more concerned about making sure that this doesn't happen to another person. We want to make sure that the truck drivers and the next time is closely following those protocols and those federal regulations. Unfortunately, the only way our civil justice system works is by handing over money. But I've had a lot of clients, most of my clients, who would say, at the end of the day, the money doesn't matter. The money doesn't make anyone safer. The money doesn't make my body regenerate and get healthier. Yeah. It's trying to hold the person who knew they were doing wrong accountable for what they knew they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a frustrating thing. Maybe it's just kind of a frustrating thing in our society in general, right? There's a lack of accountability. Yeah. So I think that if you want to make sure that, like you said, the money doesn't necessarily fix your back. It doesn't bring anybody back from the dead. It doesn't do any of that stuff, but at least you're getting something too, because you're also putting, this uprooted your entire life, this accident, between mental anguish or even just the time you have to put into getting everything going and meet with you and do all this stuff. It just changes your entire life.
I would say that, and that's one of the things that makes trucking cases much different. I mean, very often in, your neighborhood car crash, someone just made a very innocent mistake by being distracted at a stop sign or a stoplight or something like that. But on the trucking side, you can usually recreate what happened in their day to see a list of, it's almost a domino effect. They weren't enforcing their rules. They weren't enforcing the no cell phone handheld rule, and it was speeding, and it's allowing them to not get the sleep that they need to get back on the road. There's just usually a multitude of things that leads to that particular event. And it's generally failure to follow these regulations that are so important to keep the roadway safe, not just for the truckers, but for those who also, the the families and they're driving to work every day. That's who we're trying to protect as well.
Right. So when it comes to trucking accident attorneys in Georgia, what sets you and your firm apart?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Kevin. I appreciate it. We try and take a family approach to this, and we realize that most people aren't aware of the difference between just a regular, two private party car vehicle, in the neighborhood or at the grocery store versus getting hit by a truck on an interstate or somewhere else. And so trying to educate people and let them know that we're going to do everything we can to get them where we need to be. But also the background I have as an insurance defense attorney, being able to see some of those common defenses that they're going to make and the strategy from day one of what the defense is going to take. And there's a lot of times as well where we will counsel with other attorneys on how to best approach a case. So you almost take a committee approach on some of these cases, especially the really big ones, to say, hey, we're going to bring another set of eyes and we're going to do everything we can to not just maximize the settlement, to make sure that the company is held responsible for what they've done.
As I said before, you can tell your passion to help people. And I think that's commendable. And everyone in Georgia, thanks you for what you do. Well, thanks for tuning into the Peachtree Injury Talk with Attorney Jordan Jewkes. For more information or to connect with Jordan, you can visit jewkesfirm.com. That's JEWKES firm.com. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments. Jordan, always great to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
You too. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.